Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The campaign gets personal, construction near the Greensward, the school year begins, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists talking about some of the biggest stories of the past few weeks, starting with Laura Faith Cabetta, education reporter with Chalkbeat. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Toby Sells, news editor at the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you, sir.
Karanja Janaku, editor of the New Tri-State Defender. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. Let's start with the campaign, and we'll talk about school, Greensward. We have lots of things going on, but let's start with the campaign, Bill. And I'll start with you. I mean, I don't know if we made news. I mean, last week, Tammy Sawyer, county commissioner, running for mayor, was on the show and talked and had some pretty harsh words for current Mayor Jim Strickland. He will be on, I should say, the show next week to talk about his issues and talk about everything and maybe potentially address some of those things she talked about. But what have you heard? What kind of feedback have you gotten from her talk about Jim Strickland not being anti-racist enough? And she did a better job than I will in articulating her position, but talked about policies that were oppressive to African Americans and to women, and to him not doing enough to make change.
It was a pretty controversial interview, but it was also a moment when I think a lot of stuff that had been kind of under the table for people who don't watch these races 24 hours a day like we do, it was kind of a moment that really kind of defined some of the, not only the political differences, but also the personal differences that are among the elements of this campaign. We're less than a month to early voting in this election, and this is the point at which a lot of things come out, and I think what we're seeing is a race where there are some very profound differences among the three major candidates, Tammy Sawyer, Jim Strickland, and Willie Harrington, and they're now beginning to talk about those differences in a way that I think makes this a pretty meaningful campaign. This, to me, feels like a watershed campaign in terms of the city's direction.
Karanja, your thoughts on where we are with the campaign or Tammy Sawyer's interview here and the comments that she made and has made?
Well, I agree with Bill that those three main candidates in particular really give us some stark choices to make. I think with the Tammy Sawyer thing, on one level, I think there are people who sort of understand what she means by the anti-racist thing. It's an attitude about how you go about dealing with bias and race, and I think that's what she was trying to get at. I'm not so sure that it came off all that well. But in terms of the race itself, I mean, you look at your finances and your support and who's supporting them, and Strickland's has a lot going for him. Dr. Harrington is doing what Dr. Harrington needs to do, I think. He's not going to catch up with the money, but the idea of being able to get endorsements from the Police Association for AFSCME and groups that have people and boots on the ground and volunteers that can help you, we'll see if that's able to help him.
And those unions will be out in force campaigning to turn people out, right, Bill, or right, anyone, because the sales tax referendum, which is a sales tax referendum that is meant to, it's a little complicated, but meant to, why am I doing this? I should just turn it over to Bill. You described the sales tax referendum.
The ballot question is to have a half-cent sales tax increase to restore benefits, but to police and firefighters only, benefits that were cut 5 years ago by the city. So the police and fire unions will be waging, they say, a very vigorous campaign between now and Election Day. In terms of the mayor's race, Willie Harrington has swept the big three of the municipal unions, AFSCME, fire, and police. What you have to remember is that the union endorsements are good for donations, they're good for contributions. They don't always translate into unified support. The biggest example of that was in 1991 when AFSCME decided to back Dick Hackett for re-election, And there was actually a splinter group within the union that said, no, wait a minute, and wound up endorsing Harrington in the race.
One of the things, and I should say that, again, we're having Jim Strickland on next week. We've reached out to Willie Harrington's campaign, Dr. Harrington's campaign, and they have so far declined to come on the show. Laura, your thoughts right now on you don't cover campaign politics so much, but you're a reporter, you're here, you're covering all kinds of issues. Tammy Sawyer has talked about education as a priority. Jim Strickland has talked about and has gotten some pre-K funding put in place. Your thoughts on the race so far?
Well, I haven't seen a whole lot of talk about education in this race, and I'd be curious, especially from what I hear from parents, from teachers, from district leadership, of where the city is going to stand, whoever's going to be mayor next, as far as putting money into K through 12 education. Mayor Strickland has talked about, putting pre-K money, bringing that across the finish line. But even this past budget season, Superintendent Doris Ray really, I think, gave voice to what had been bubbling up for years of, well, when is the city going to get back into K through 12 funding? So I'd be really curious to see what the candidates have to say about that.
Other thoughts from you, Toby, on the race so far, and the kind of tenor of the discussion and the tenor of what got a little bit ugly. It's been sort of brewing and getting uglier and uglier over many months.
That was really interesting, and the behind the headlines was fascinating. We have a story coming out in Memphis Magazine all about the mayor's race, coming out by our Jackson Baker, so be sure to watch for that. But I did want to point out Bill Dries wrote a great story that kind of really put the differences between Strickland and Sawyer kind of in stark relief on the police issue. Of course, Mayor Strickland wants more police, and he's really proud of the fact that he's growing the police force. Tammy says, Sawyer says that we've got enough, but on different ends of the spectrum. Strickland had a die-in on his front lawn there, and then Sawyer on the other side was a part of a group that was under police surveillance for some of their activities, and apparently that's a really sore spot. I mean, according to Bill, between them, it's a really personal issue that's kind of bubbling up into this into the election. It
was interesting actually that Commissioner Sawyer, when she was on the show, talked about how she didn't say that we didn't need more police. She said it's just she wanted more community policing.
Right.
She wanted more a different approach to policing. That police weren't the only answer, and that there were other issues. And so it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. I want to shift real quickly, and Bill, if you could do, and anyone else can comment, but Bill, if you just do a rundown of where we are on how many city council races are there? There's 6 or 8 or all
13.
All 13
city council seats are on the ballot this time too, and nobody is running unopposed. No incumbent is running unopposed. You actually have 3 open seats where the incumbents cannot run for re-election because of term limits, and they are all super district seats. You have 1 seat that's open by virtue of the fact that the person appointed to it, Jerry Curry, has decided to seek a full term on the council, but not to that seat. She's running for one of the open super district seats. So you really have 4 open seats out there. The competition is underway. Those council candidates have their yard signs up everywhere, and they're moving around the community because we're in the point now where you put it all out on the street in terms of your campaign.
And again, let's say one more time when early voting starts.
Early voting starts September 13th. It runs through the 28th. Election day in Memphis is October 3rd. I distinguish that from Arlington because Arlington has elections next month.
It drives me nuts. And I will do a shameless plug that Bill has done a number of profiles of city council candidates on the Politics podcast on Daily Memphian. And I also should note that this show is now a podcast available on the Daily Memphian and iTunes and Spotify and everywhere else. Laura, let's switch to, you mentioned Doris Ray, the new superintendent. He's going into his first full school year. He was named interim in January, February, I think, if I'm not mistaken, when Dorsey Hobson resigned or retired, and after 4 or 5 really sort of incredible and difficult and transformative years. Your thoughts so far on, you mentioned Doris Ray and the Superintendent Ray and the budgets and asking about city funding, and as we go into this new school year, do you see big changes? Do you see continuation of the sort of reforms that have been put in place? Where is it going?
It's a mixed bag. From what I've seen so far, there's a lot of things that are staying the course, and there's a lot of things that are kind of ramping up certain initiatives. I think some of the new things that we can look to see how those go is he recently launched an African American male empowerment program meant to be able to recruit more black male teachers in the classroom, which has been shown to be able to increase achievement for black students. He's talked about putting more mentoring programs and has really leaned on different data points showing that black boys have lower achievement compared to the district average. And we're looking to kind of dig into that data more of how does that look, compared to, say, black girls. What are the things that really set that apart and what is actually going to work. So we'll see how that goes.
I saw you nodding there, Karanja. Your
Well,
thoughts?
I'm very much interested in what Superintendent Ray does with the African American Male Initiative, but maybe even more interest to me is what's going to happen with the whole social, emotional learning component and adverse child experiences. And there seems to be a push, to try to equip teachers and administrators with how to handle disruptive students, but not in a just punishment kind of way, but something that actually helps them get beyond the experiences both in the short term and in the long term. I was over at Jeter K-8 last week where the principal over there, Eric Harris, had introduced the new Power Zone, which is designed to be a place where young people can come and get the help that they need. First of all, just to calm down, but get the help that they need. Because there are some serious issues there that the children come to school with. They already have them when they come to school, and there has to be more of an emphasis on how we help not only the young people, but how do we help the teachers and administrators deal with that? Because it can get physical. I mean, even this past week, I know of at least one incident where our principal found himself in a physical altercation, and just trying to deal with the events of the day.
It was interesting. It's interesting you bring that up because 2-3 weeks ago we had Memphis Police Director Mike Rawlings on the show, and we talked about crime and what can you do and policing, and he talked about this recognition of early childhood trauma and the connection with later life violence. You even if you're not a victim of I think I'll paraphrase probably poorly, but even if a child is not a victim of child abuse, but they witness violence in the home, they witness violence in their life as a young person, they are exponentially more likely to act violently later. It's just learned behavior. And we've had a number of education people on the show over the years talking about all this research coming out about early childhood trauma and how do you learn when you've had those traumas? How do you sit in a chair and read and learn and just participate? And that it is this kind of progression of the schools becoming so much social services and support and beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yeah, and I think this past year has been a lot of awareness that is a thing, and I think this year we'll see what are some strategies to actually help and move past that. So that's what we'll be looking at to see.
One thing I was kind of interested in, staying with schools for a second, I don't know who wants to take this, but the $15 an hour issue at Shelby County School System, just this week in the County Commission, Edmund Ford, who is a teacher as well, put forward do you want to take this, Bill? The move towards $15 an hour in the school system and something that could cost, according to Ford, up to $25 million additionally to get everyone at a minimum of $15 in the school system.
Yeah, the county commission provided some funding. It provides a major part of the funding to Shelby County schools, but the commission allocated or suggested that the school system use some of that to deal with bringing everybody up to $15 an hour. Well, then Commissioner Ford looked at it and said, well, wait a minute, I want to pin this down and maybe go back on using this for $15 an hour. The problem with that, and the reason that the full commission and committee this past week kind of reeled that back in, is because the commission doesn't have line item authority on the school system's budget.
In other words, if they give them an extra $25 million, the school system is then free to spend it within reason any way it wants.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's been reeled back in by the commission and committee. We'll see what happens when the full commission votes on this on Monday. But this is kind of a jurisdictional line in terms of funding. Suggestions, even political pressure, yes, but the commission cannot tell them how to spend that money.
Where does Superintendent Ray and the school board stand on getting everyone to a minimum of $15?
Well, the pushback that I've heard from them when it comes to the county promoting that has kind of been, well, it's great that the mayor's touting that, and hopefully we can get funding to do that. But also, what the school board did, or the district did last year, was to bring $15 an hour for all full-time employees, and what was left was for part-time employees to also get that same wage. But what I've heard from the finance folks is that once you bring everyone to $15 an hour, there are also the people who are already at $15 an hour that you then need to also move up. So the cost estimations have been kind of a point of contention between the county and the school system.
There's a whole pay structure, and it's not unique to Shelby County Schools. It's within any organization. If you have people who are supervisors above those people on the pay chart, then what do you
push
do?
everyone as you go. I got you. Well, I mentioned this at the top of the show, Toby. Construction is starting near the Greensward, not on the Greensward, but the Prentice Place lot over by, what is that, McLean?
Right.
That entrance at the zoo and Overton Park. And this is all coming out of the long, decades-long controversy, and a couple years now, the fight and mediation and so on between zoo and supporters of the Greensward, Overton Park Conservancy, of which I am the former past president and still a board member, I should disclose. Thoughts on construction, first phase of construction starting Monday?
Well, to say first, this issue is a lot less serious than childhood trauma or education or all the other things facing the community. However, this has been, I checked back, the first story I did about this was 2014, so this has been going on for 5 years now. That was when Get Off Our Lawn launched a Facebook page to say, hey, we would like for this to change, and it's taken this long to get to what will be the beginning of the end of parking on the Overton Park Greensward. Again, when you say it in the context of this conversation, it doesn't sound very serious, but it's been out there looming for a long, long time. Construction starts Monday, and they're going to take that northwest lot, Prentice Place lot, they're going to close it down, and they're going to work on that for about 3 months, and a lot of overflow parking probably will go on the Greensward during that time. But then when they're finished, they'll have 180 extra spaces there, and then they'll move on to the main lot there and move about, a bunch of trees and things like that. So it's going to be kind of chaotic, a little pandemonium over there at the zoo for this season while they're building it. But when that main lot is finished, they'll build a berm right around the parking lot, and that will be it. There will be no more parking on the Overton Park Greensward, and a lot of people have watched this for a long time. It took a long time to kind of get to a compromise on this, and it was really interesting. And I think kind of the next battlefront that we're going to see on something like this will be the fight for Tom Lee Park. It's kind of the next one coming down the road, so we'll see how that goes. But it's a big victory for everybody involved: the zoo, the Alliance, the Overton Park Alliance, and everybody else. So it's great that they finally came to a compromise on this patch of grass.
And this comes as the zoo has a new president CEO, Jim Dean, who I've had a chance to meet just casually, but he's been out meeting with groups, Overton Park Alliance, Overton Park Conservancy. He was at the Overton Park Conservancy board meeting recently, and he's been meeting with anyone and everyone who will talk. And right or wrong, I think I can say that the former president Chuck Brady became, and probably far too much, a kind of target. And actually, I think his tires got slashed. It was a really such a terrible thing that happened. And terrible, sort of conflict. But Jim Dean has been out there and has met with people and has sort of tried to set this new tone of not expanding, of taking care of the land they have. And we hope to get him on the show sometime this fall to talk more about the future of the zoo.
And just to show that, as soon as Dean was in there, one of the first things that happened, he got a team from the zoo to go out and clean up the Greensward, and that was like this kind of insane moment, that we're going to get these folks, and it's like cats and dogs living together. It was great.
Yeah, I talked to him about that yesterday. There was not an elaborate ceremony, but a formal ceremony to announce the kickoff, and it was done in the replica of a Chinese courtyard in the China exhibit at the
Panda,
near
the pandas.
Yeah.
Okay.
The pandas were not interested, I'm sure, but
it's not their fault.
It's been a pretty wild ride for the last 5 years on this issue, kind of coming up out of nowhere. That actually started with a group of high school students.
That's right.
Who just decided that, hey, how long has this been going on? We don't care, block the gravel driveway. And it was a way to the races, largely because the Conservancy had been around for a little while at that point and was starting to do programming on the Greens Ward as well, which hadn't been there. So pretty interesting controversy overall.
There was a helicopter monitoring a protest. They had a second line for some trees that had been cut down at one point. It's been a wild story.
I have so much I could say.
Well, it is an important issue. I know Toby was making a little bit light of it, but what happens out there is a big deal. I mean, not only for those of us who use the park, but in a broader sense. I mean, park and arts and all of those things contribute to, to learning the environment. And so we need to give it the priority that it deserves, and it doesn't necessarily have to be compared to.
Sure.
Well, I also think that as you look at the broader arc of our new activism across the city, I think you have to include the Greens Ward protest as an important part of that, because a lot of the people who were involved in that issue became involved in other issues, and people from other issues became involved in the Greens Ward as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one thing I will say, and this was fairly public, but at some point, all these ideas were being tossed around about how to solve the problem, and one was to run trams through the roads in the Old Forest from the general services area and turn that into a parking lot, and other places have trams. And I remember some of us, probably me included, saying whether or not that's a good idea, you think you've seen protests now. I mean, you're going to have human chains in the Old Forest.
Certainly.
You're going to, I mean, it just won't be productive. Whether or not, again, whether or not I thought it was a good idea, I didn't. But anyway, it is great, and I don't mean to speak for OPC, but I think everyone feels this great relief that is over, and we can hopefully move on to new things and other things and so on. Where else do we want to go? I was struck by. Well, let's do Tomley Park and the riverfront. They are still in mediations and thus in a quasi-media blackout. Is that where they are?
Last we've heard, the indications were that there would be some kind of announcement of the end of mediation, and probably at least a dozen amendments to the park plan as part of that. Yeah. But since then, we've heard nothing other than that the festival, Memphis in May, is for sure moving out of the park temporarily in 2021.
Just for the 1 year.
For the 1 year.
And then, but will definitively be it was an interesting moment. I don't think we've talked about on the show, where Mayor Strickland came out in his weekly update, which he sometimes does make news, and he made news that Friday. This was probably 3 weeks ago, where he said that the mediation, which was new, I think, and I think people in the administration knew it, they just didn't present it as quite as new as it was, that the mediation is only about how Memphis in May and the newly reconfigured park will coexist, not whether they will coexist. And up until then, and we had some folks on the show from a group that was very worried that Memphis in May and the Beale Street Music Festival and the Barbecue Fest were going to get moved out permanently, and it loss of economic impact and so on. That was a big reframing of the discussion some 3 weeks ago to say, no, it's going to stay. It's just a matter of how they stay and how it is made to happen, which took some of the pressure off the situation for people who were getting really worked up.
I think it was a critical moment, because the response within an hour of the mayor's email came from the festival saying, great, now we start planning for 2020 and we are prepared to move in 2021. It was immediate.
We'll go with some hard cuts and changes here. We'll go to the death penalty, and an interesting interview you did with just a couple of minutes left here, Toby, with a conservative group that, I mean, I think traditionally in my lifetime, conservatives have been much more associated with law and order, tough on crime, pro death penalty, and more of a liberal position was, and death penalty is bad. But this conservative group in Tennessee is not happy with the increased number of death penalty executions, in Tennessee. Talk a little bit about that.
Last Thursday, the state executed Stephen Michael West, who'd been on death row for a long time. And so this Tennessee group is part of like a larger national group. It's called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. They're having their first annual meeting in New Orleans in September. And they say that the death penalty is basically against the basic tenets of conservatism. They even say it's it was a symbol of big broken government, that it costs too much to execute people, that justice is slowed by years of appeals. It's not swift justice whatsoever. And they really believe that they are just now starting to change the conversation about the death penalty in red state legislatures.
And it has been a movement nationally. I mean, I think Oklahoma had moved in this direction. I think some very conservative states. that it's to paraphrase, I mean, it's not pro-life, and these tend to be very pro-life conservatives and pro-life states. It's extremely expensive. I mean, Amy Lawrence, in your interview, talked about it's $1 million to $2 million more to go through the process of an execution versus life without parole.
Right.
And again, they are not talking about letting people out. They're not talking about rehabilitation. They're not talking about some of the things that I think people on the other end of the spectrum talk about. But they are talking about this pragmatic.
Exactly.
This is not good government. Also, the whole idea that, and I'm quoting from your article, Amy Lawrence said, "We simply cannot guarantee that we can carry out capital punishment with 100% accuracy." And that has happened. I turn to you, Karan. I mean, many times around the country, more and more DNA evidence, people have been imprisoned for decades who it turns out they did not commit that crime. And potentially people have been put, I mean, one would say the likelihood is people have been put to death by states, I don't know about Tennessee, who didn't commit the crime, and DNA evidence would have overturned that. Your thoughts on this, the conservatives coming out in this direction, this conservative group coming out in this direction?
Well, I'm for any discussion about what we do about it. I do think that the state has the right, you know, to, in a larger sense, to make those kinds of decisions. But it depends upon where we are as individuals when you're executing policy. And that's with everything. You know, you can have policy, but it's what is the mindset of the people and how they carry those things out. And when I look at where we are in Tennessee and across the country relative to justice, we got a lot of work to do.
And I didn't give you enough time, but we'll leave it there. Thank you. Next week, Mayor Jim Strickland. Thank you all for joining us. Good night.